Familiar faces, some people who are, it's their first time here. Midrash Aviv is our community Beit Midrash, which we have almost every night of the week. 2 nights in this shul, Ichud Shabbat Zion, 2 nights in Me'asim V'Shesh and 126. We've got the special privilege and opportunity of welcoming Michael Eisenberg to our pre-Purim learning this year. Just by way of very quick introduction, Michael is a man of many talents. Aside from being one of Israel's leading VCs, he's an ardent Zionist. I remember hearing fondly, I think almost 10 years ago, Michael quoted as one of the moments which changed his life was when he was in discussion with Rabbi Yehuda Amital, who was his Rosh Yeshiva. I think, if I recall correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, over whether it's better to come to Israel and live in a big city like Yerushalayim or Tel Aviv, or to go to one of the far out areas which don't have, which aren't big population centers like the two cities I mentioned. And he said, come to Israel, start a business, and employ 10,000 people, which Michael cited as one of the changing moments of his life, which I think...
He said so that they can earn an honest and decent living.
So that they can earn an honest and decent living, which is a refreshing, practical vision for Zionism, I would say. Michael also writes a lot of Sfarim on Tanakh. He's finishing off a series which examines economic ideas that come out from the Chamesh Chumshei Torah. And even before that, he published the book which we're going to kind of focus our discussion of tonight on Megillat Esther. Now, Megillat Esther is at first glance, is a fascinating collection of interesting but useless details. There's a pretty clear story, but there's a huge amount of time which is spent building this extremely rich fabric where it details color schemes, interior design, political appointments, courier services, brief historical mentions and economic ideas. Now, generally speaking, when you've got a text, especially a text as wise as one of the Sfarim of Tanakh, which gives you so much excess detail, the detail is not excess at all. It's really trying to tell a embellished story, or maybe a second story alongside the primary story, which is going to be the kind of one of the things we're going to try to look at tonight. Now, what we've done is, if you actually look in front of at least all the chairs in the first few rows, maybe also in the back rows, there's actually a Chumash there or a Megillah there. So everyone actually has a Megillah, so they can follow with us. You can open up the Megillah. In the Chumash, you'll find it after the end of Sefer Shemot. If you can't find it, turn to someone on your right or your left, and I'm sure they'll be able to help out. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to really examine the ideas that we're going to discuss through the prism of the text. If anyone has any questions, any suggestions, any disagreements they want to voice, then just put up your hand, feel free, and we'll do our best to come to you. So just as a kind of very brief introduction for us, I wonder, your book is titled The Vanishing Jew, yep. And the clue is in the name. Your book's a fascinating but quite cutting read of Megillat Esther, I would say. Can you just give us in 2 minutes some framing of the main idea of why you wrote this book and what it's about?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me, Rosen. Second of all, the book is free to anyone who came tonight. This is not just my being kind of giving of the book. My wife would actually be thrilled if you took it. The story behind the book, if you look at the side, is that they printed 300 books with a tiny misprint on the back side here where it says the Vanishing Jew instead of the Vanishing Jew. And my wife can't get rid of these books. And she said, you're going tonight? Great. Take the books and give them out for free. And in the back of each one of them is also a Megillah, if you need that. So where did this come from? You see, she's getting up to get one because my wife said to take it.
Well, she heard it's free.
So, I've been reading the Megillah since I'm 13 years old, meaning I've been reading it in shul since I'm 13 years old. And I kind of feel and live the text. And my day job, as you heard from Rabbi Rosen, is that I'm involved in the economy. And I paid attention initially to something that I thought was odd, and that is the Megillah starts with a big economic description about the wealth of Achashverosh's malchut, of his kingdom. And it ends with this really strange chapter of just 3 psukim. and Achashverosh levied a tax on the land and on the islands, which seemingly is about the Greek islands. And when you look at the bookends of a book, it tells a story about what the book's about, right? Why does it open with something about wealth, riches, the economy, and close with something that's about taxes and the economy? And it began to kind of clue me in that maybe there's more to this story than meets the eye. And the basic thesis of the book suggests that there are two threats to the Jewish people. And I just want to back up and say that the question I think is posed to, not to me so much as to the Mefarshim, but somebody wrote this book, right? And it's written most likely during the time post-Nehemiah in Eretz Yisrael. It's written in Hebrew of the Second Temple period and Second Beit HaMikdash period. And he had a message, right? He wrote the book, whoever it was, or Anshe Knesset HaGdolah wrote the book, and they're trying to tell a story. And my argument is there's two threats to the Jewish people. One is anti-Semitism, and the second is assimilation that happens in the Golah, and that the assertion of the author of the Megillah is that the more serious threat to the Jewish people is assimilation and not anti-Semitism, which is roughly the opposite of how we think about this. Subsequent to publishing the book, I actually saw that Rav Hirsch writes at the beginning of Parshat Toldot, Rav Shimshon Hirsch, great leader of German Orthodoxy, that anti-Semitism kind of brings the tribe together in many ways, and he's obviously dealing with assimilation and Reform Judaism at the time there.
First person to call Am Yisrael was Paro when he wanted to wipe out the Jewish people.
Indeed. But Paro was also the first known anti-Semite, right? At the end of the day, we don't read the pasuk that way because the Midrashim have gotten into our heads, but the pasuk says, "U'bnei Yisrael paru vayishutzu vayirbu vayatzmu b'ma'od ma'od." You need to speak louder.
Oh, okay.
And and everyone walks around because we all learned in kindergarten that this means that every Jewish woman had 6 babies in their stomach at the same time. And so we think it's a great thing, but the pasuk says vayishratzu, and they were like shratzim, like varmint. And so that is not a kind way to call children or the Jewish people. In fact, the Nazis called us that.
Interesting. So if we actually kind of like take that into the text, I think one of the interesting points you brought out regarding assimilation comes very early in the first parak. You've got this kind of thrilling description of this great feast, which we're told, doesn't say in the Psukim, but we're told by... Can everyone hear me?
Just speak up.
We don't need. We've got this thrilling, very descriptive tale of the feast of Achashverosh. And we're told that Am Yisrael turned up, the Jews turned up at the feast. And then we're told this little side story, which you don't actually need to know, which is that Vashti was invited to dance or to parade herself in front of Achashverosh and all his partying courtiers, and she doesn't come. And you quite pointedly express there that that's kind of a foil for Am Yisrael, for the Jews who were there in Paras Madai, that they're very happy to turn up to the Suda. And who's the one person who's got a bit of backbone? It's not the Jews, it's Vashti. Can you expand a bit on that?
Oh, you did a good job. So, first is the opening. It starts, Vayihi bimei Achashverosh. The words Vayihi bimei, the Gemara Megillah says, portends disaster. I think particularly if you trace the words Vayihi bimei throughout Tanakh, and there's 5 appearances of it, you'll see it portends economic disaster. And it's really talking about the economy, just simple, Vayihi bimei shvot hashoftim, Vayihi ra'av ba'aretz in the case of Ruth. And there's a famine. And yet you have Achashverosh there kind of commanding this giant celebration, this giant feast. It doesn't explicitly say that the Jews are there. Chazal do say that they partook, misu'udato shel oto rasha, that they partook of his grand feast there. And then we have this strange little story, like you said, of Vashti. And it's like, she kind of matters for the story of Esther that comes afterwards, but it's pretty well drawn out there that she refuses to come. And I think if you think about this in contrast to what's going on in general in Shushan, with everybody turning up, feasting in a drunken feast, and by the way, what is in many cases probably a sexual feast, licentious feast, Vashti says, I'm not going to be a part of this. And she's almost hanging out there as somebody who is the moral conscience saying, you can say no. You don't need to be a part of this. You can be a contrarian here. And we actually don't know what happened to her, by the way. We all walk away from the Megillah thinking that she's dead. It never says that. We have no idea what happened to her. She's removed, a priori, but we don't know what happens to her until the end of time. And she stands as like kind of this enigmatic woman of valor and resistance, that she's not willing to partake of this. By the way, funny story from the last few weeks. A woman who lives here in Tel Aviv, not American, Israeli, picked up the book. She's from a Masorati family. She hasn't stopped driving people crazy about Vashti since she picked up the book. The Vashti character, this notion of a woman of valor standing up and being able to say no, is something that, she grew up thinking that Vashti is kind of this, bad person, I guess. That's the way we think about her.
Both can be true. She's still got the ability to say no to Achashverosh.
Yeah, multiple things can be true in the story. The beautiful of the literature of Megillat Esther is there's a lot of things that can be read into it. But I think she stands out there as almost a warning sign to the Jews. Get out of this. What are you doing here? But they don't heed.
Why is that? Why are the Jews not prepared to have their own separate identity?
Okay, this will be a little tricky. Broadly speaking, because identity has like become a topic now, like identitarian politics has become a topic. But broadly, in your identity, you've got to decide who you are. And most people in life just want to fit in. I mean, think about it. Wherever you are, in whatever situation you're in, most people just want to fit in to the best they can. And in fact, when you come to any society and you're an immigrant, you have your own particularistic identity, which could be where I came from, it could be my religion, it could be my family, and then there's kind of the national identity. And because we all kind of want to fit in, and now we're in generation 4 post the destruction of the first temple of Churban Bayit Rishon, most people just want to fit in. And they change their names to kind of fit in. And it becomes difficult to stand aside. My family's been in America. I'll speak for my own. We did not go through the Holocaust, my family. They've been in America for a long time. And I have second cousins who are assimilated Americans. The particularistic Jewish identity did not hold up, as I think happens in most countries. After I wrote the book, David Bloomberg, who was the chairman of the National Library, and before that CEO of Bank Mizrahi, an amazing man, called me in. I had a relationship with him, and he said, hey, you missed a very important fact in the book. I said, what's that? He said, how many people moved, I think he said the dates were between 1880 and World War I, so it's about 35 years, moved from Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, to North and South America. I said, I don't know. He said it was about 3 million Jews. And if you just multiply the population from population growth, there should be, from that cohort alone, about 12 million Jews in North and South America. It does not include post-World War I immigration, not post-World War II immigration, but there's still only, call it 7-ish million Jews in North and South America today. Where'd they go? There's been no anti-Semitism. The answer is they absorb the host identity. And on some level, it's only natural. And so here we are in Shushan, 4 generations after the destruction of the first temple, 4.5 generations after Galut Acharashva Masker, which is kind of the artisans and kind of wealthy of society who were exiled or to Babylonia. And most people are assimilated. I think that's true. Now, there are Jewish settlements in this place, Al Yehudu, and there was a Mikdash in Egypt during the time of the Second Temple. But the vast majority of people, like we see today, look around. Where are you from? Your family's from the UK?
Yep.
What's the rate of intermarriage?
Pretty high.
Very high. In France? Yeah. Very high. In America? Very high. I don't mean to say it flippantly, but it's life. And it's worrisome.
On the backdrop of
that. Should worry us.
On the backdrop of that, you've got this kind of dynamic within the Megillah that Mordechai is Mordechai Yehudi.
Yeah.
And his lineage is very, very, very clearly given throughout almost the entire Sefer, with a few, at the beginning.
His lineage means Mordechai HaYehudi.
Yehudi. Yeah. And his full lineage, not his full lineage, his partial, complete family tree is given at the beginning.
That's definitely not his family tree, I'll argue.
With notable exceptions for reasons which you can expand on.
Yeah.
But then Esther, who's the main character, literally intermarries.
Yeah.
So it could be there's some tension there, as in it's not just simply that all the Jews are intermarried or have assimilated. You've got this generational divide at some point between the old and the new.
It could be. Look, you and I are still here, right? Our families both went through the Galut, and people survive it. But the question I'm trying to deal with is, what's the bigger threat? Is it the anti-Semitism in the Megillah, the anti-Semitism of Haman, or is it the assimilation that ultimately happens? Look, Mordechai's name is in itself interesting, right? So first of all, he's called Mordechai, which is named after the Persian Babylonian god Marduk, right? It's like calling your kid in New York Christopher today, right? On some level. We don't think about it that way because we have a lot of Jewish people named Mordechai today. But that's basically the equivalent at the time. And Esther, a priori, despite Chazal's drashan, is likely named after the goddess Ashtar, right? Or Ishtar. And so those are challenging names. And she is definitely, right, Esther bat Avichail, right, who's the daughter of Mordechai. There's a generational transition there, it seems. Mordechai himself, that lineage is meant to tell us something. I don't think that's his family lineage. Ben Kish probably attaches him somewhere to Shevet Binyamin. He's called Mordechai Yehudi. What that means doesn't mean that he comes from Shevet Yehuda. Doesn't mean that he was part of the Galut of Yehuda. Or is he from the Babylonian town of Al Yehudu? This is not in the book. This is something I discovered afterwards, which was kind of, think about it as, New York City for Jews at the time. What?
Jewtown.
Yeah, it's a place of a Jewish settlement. Yeah, Jewtown. I don't know. We don't know that much about him at the end of the time. He definitely is not, right? The pasuk goes, Asher hegla miYerushalayim hagolah asher glata im Yechonia melech Yehuda. Asher hegla Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel. Well, okay, it's not the timing of this Megillah. So if Mordechai, for example, had been part of the Galut of Harash Masker, right, which is what it was, he'd probably about 120 at the beginning of the Megillah. Minimum. Maybe more depending on when the story of the Megillah happens. And so,
just as a clarifying point, there are 2 points where the Jews are exiled from Eretz Yisrael. One is during the kingdom of Tzidkiyahu, who was the final king when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. And then, I think 2 kings before that, the king was exiled from Israel by Nebuchadnezzar, was the king of Babel, the king of Babylon, and he took with him kind of the elite.
The elite.
The Pesukim detail all the thinkers, all the professional leaders went with him, and the Pesukim basically say that the Am Haaretz, which basically means the paupers and we would call them the Nebuchs, were left behind.
Right. There's actually a third Galut, just to finish the story, which is why we fast on Tzom Gedaliah. Right. Ultimately, after the killing of Gedaliah ben Achikam, who was appointed the governor of Yehuda at the time, there's a third Galut to Mitzrayim, which, by the way, is ironic, because the way the Nevi'im basically end is that the Jews go back to Egypt after having left Egypt at the beginning of Shemot. But yeah, there are 2 Galuyot, and he's from the first one, or his family is from the first one, but it's not Mordechai. That's very clear. He's kind of 4 generations or so down from that Golan. It's like we all see today, whether in the UK or France or the US. I don't think it's terribly different. We can kind of relate to this.
I think there is one difference, if you'll permit me to add a difference, and that is that we're used to being outsider Jews, because we're coming as 2,000 years of exiles, basically.
Yeah.
As in, it's almost like a Jewish trait that someone will do something bad to us at some point in time. We're used to kind of being kicked around. I think it's very notable that in the Megillah, this is the first time that you find a story about Jews being put into exile. You mentioned earlier about national religious identity. This is the first time where you find a split between the 2.
Yep.
Until then, with one very notable exception, if anyone can guess it, I'll be very impressed. the Jews have always been, whenever they've never been separated from their land since they went into it. And therefore, it's actually very easy to see why there can be a lot of assimilation, because basically, it makes a lot of sense to think that God has abandoned you at that point in time. The Beit HaMikdash stood for 400 years. The Jews were in Israel for at least 800 years. And suddenly you see the Beit HaMikdash destroyed in front of you. You're sent into Galut. You see Babylon and then Persia and Media. You see these great empires rise. And it's a very interesting point which you make throughout the book. Persia is at least the first recorded multicultural empire.
Yep.
Time and time again, stressed through the Megillah, you find Bilshanam, you find each language is kept. They send out messages to all the different nations. There's an emphasis on there being different nations all the time. They have their own different languages. And suddenly the Jews find themselves in an unprecedented situation. For us, being an exile, assimilating, being the minority, we've got 2,000 years of precedent.
Yeah, by the way, by the same token, but in an inverse way, right now, the period we're living in this second is only the second time in history, though, that we have kind of two competing, call it homelands for the Jewish people, right? So you need to place the Megillah in its historical context. So there's one approach in Chazal which says that the story of the Megillah happens between the first and the second temple, in that 7-year intervening period. More likely based both on the book of Ezra, Sefer Ezra, and the Ibn Ezra and others, this happens about 70, 75 years into the return to Shivat Zion, to return to Zion, that happens initially with Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel and Yoshua Kohen HaGadol, and then later with Ezra and then Nehemiah. But we have two competing centers. There's the Second Republic of Israel, or Second Kingdom of Israel, that is then forming, and Jews in the diaspora. And this is actually the first time ever that we had a diaspora community from which returned to the land the pioneers who set up a Jewish state. These were tough years for that Jewish state. I mean, if you read through Ezra and Nehemiah, the people are poor, there's terrorism, Sabalat HaCholoni, Tovia Amoni, there's terrorism, there's hard time rebuilding the institutions of state. They need to recruit an army. I mean, it's literally like what we've been going through here for the last 75 years. And so there's a tension also between the person writing the Megillah, who writes in Hebrew and I think is living here, and the people who stayed behind in the Golah.
And there's little details thrown in all the time, if you could expand on that a bit. Little hints towards the fact that maybe they should be helping out there. Maybe there's little hints towards the
yeah,
Mikdash.
That comes more towards the end of the Megillah, I think. But, you know, first of all, there's the description of the palace, which almost sounds like a marvelous Beit Mikdash. And the words are yours. Chur karpasu tchelet, achuz bechav libut tzvar gaman. Right? Those are words that we use to describe the big day Kunai. By the way, the Midrash also says on the Pesukim of the Kelim Shonim, it says that they use the Kelim of the Beit HaMikdash. But the notion is the same, which is the Pe'er, the beauty that's appearing in Achashverosh is also here. When you come back, you come towards the end of the Megillah, kind of the way I think of the Matanot le'Evyonim notion, you'll notice in the two descriptions of why to keep the holiday, Matanot le'Evyonim only appears in the second description. It appears that the holiday is not accepted the first time. Evyonim, and I'll spare you the textual analysis here, you can look in the book, is really a poor farmer in Israel. You can prove it through the Torah. It means someone who doesn't have enough liquidity, not enough income to be able to work his land, even if he has a piece of land. And they kind of put out blue pushkas, like we used to do for Karen Kayemet, and say, Matanot le'Evyonim, and they get the holiday accepted in Israel. But throughout the book, through the use of different words, you see that the author is almost teasing the people in the Golah, saying, what are you still doing there? Come here. This is where we're rebuilding our people. And like I said, you can see it throughout the book.
If we're going to move through Megillat Esther a bit, there's a fascinating little episode at the end of Perek Bet, which kind of touches on a completely different theme to what we've been talking about until now. Which comes out quite nicely that if you actually look at the wording of this little story at the end of Perek Bet, it expresses quite a deep economic idea, which you express in your book. If everyone, you can even look in if you want, and Michael could take us through. There's the story of Bigtan and Teresh. Now, what's fascinating about the story of Bigtan and Teresh, who plot to kill Achashverosh, is we're already 2 prakim into Megillat Esther. That's 20% in, and we don't actually have any of the story, any of the Haman wanting to kill the Jewish people. The prologue to all that happening, literally the prologue to all that happening, the few psukim beforehand, is this little story about 2 people working in the palace who want to poison Achashverosh. How do you read that story?
Okay, so the psukim literally say, Katzaf Bigtan Teresh, right? They want to kill him. Doesn't exactly say how. The Midrash says that they want to poison him. And it calls him Shnei Sarisei HaMelech Mishomrei Asaf. These are 2, Sarisim either means eunuchs or it means Mishartim. The old, I learned actually not long ago that the old Akkadian for Mishartim sounds similar to Sarisim. Either way, they're senior people, but they're called Shomrei Asaf. Now, in modern Hebrew, and particularly with various things going on here, we have this notion that Shomrei Asaf in this country are either like people in the Shabak or legal advisors, but in Tanakh, that's not what it means. In Tanakh, very clearly, if you read the Haftarah for Parshat Shkalim, it's there too. Shomrei Asaf are the treasury ministers, secretary of the treasury, the finance minister. They're the guys who count the money. Now, this is literally the psukim right before the rise of Haman. And it's after the story of Esther getting elected or selected as the queen. And if you pay attention to what's going on, you'll see that there's a bunch of years between Perek Aleph and Perek Bet. By the way, funny question, Rabbi Rosen said that the Megillah is 10 prakim. How many years did it take for the Megillah? How many? Yeah, 12, 13 years, but we think it happens like over days or months, right? But it's 12 or 13 years. There's 4 years between Perek Aleph and Perek Bet, and something happens, and what happens is a war, in all likelihood. And when you have wars, what happens to the coffers of the nation? They're dwindled, and here is Bigtan and Teresh, the Treasury Secretary, Shomrei Asaf, who are looking around and saying, we have a problem. There's not enough money around here. And when there's economic trouble, what's the canary in the coal mine when there's economic trouble? Populism and anti-Semitism, right? It happens every time. So Bigtan and Teresh try to kill Achashverosh because he's now spent the war chest of the country. He's gone from having these massive parties at the beginning and this unbelievable show of wealth to having a small party for Esther. V'hanachot lamdinot asa. He gave discounts. What does it mean? That's populism. That's what we do, right? When we get into trouble, politicians stand up and become populist. They start giving people things free, except there are no free lunches. And the responsible adults, Bigtan and Teresh, start to look at this and say, we got a problem. And so they want to kill Achashverosh. Mordechai finds out. He tells Esther, who tells Achashverosh, and these 2 people are hung, actually, and right afterwards, Gidal hamelech Achashverosh et Haman ben Amdasa, vayinase'eu vayasem et kiso me'al kol hasarim asher ito. Who do you elevate up in this time? A new economic czar, someone who will do the bidding of the king. And you want proof that the king needs money? Haman is able to bribe Achashverosh to kill the Jews with 10,000 kikar kesef, 10,000 kikar kesef, 10,000 silver bars or silver talents, because he needs money. And it becomes about the money.
But interestingly enough,
yeah,
he offers him the money,
yeah,
but he doesn't take the money.
He does not take the money.
If he needed the money, why didn't he take the money?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I think he assumes that Haman taking control of this and maybe wiping out the Jews will give him more money.
Okay.
We've seen that before, by the way.
We've seen a lot of things before.
Yeah, we've seen that before in history. And he decides not to take the money. Right? Akesef natulach va'am la'asot bo katov beinecha. Sometimes it's enough to kind of head fake populism and policy and not actually follow through on that. We see that also a lot, but it's a good question.
Okay, and what you're trying
just to add, it's clearly economic, right? Between Bigtan and Teresh, the Shomrei Asaf, and Haman's offer, we understand that what's at play here is an economic discussion. At the end of the day, it then turns to anti-Semitism. Because again, bad economic times always breed anti-Semitism. Look at Germany, right? Massive inflation.
I'm wondering if that very much connects why Bigtan and Teresh comes before Haman.
Correct.
What's interesting is also what it comes after. It comes directly after
Esther's election.
Esther's election and this
selection,
and this mysterious habit, which I only actually thought about this year, that Esther, the psukim detail, that Esther doesn't say that she's Jewish. Right? We know this from primary school. We all learn that Esther doesn't say that she's Jewish. Why can't she say that she's Jewish?
You know, she's married to the king. I'm not sure he wants a Jewish bride, an immigrant bride. I think that's part of it.
It's interesting to note that when he gathers together all the women, he's taking a woman from
everywhere,
all the countries.
He is.
He doesn't seem to be particularly fussy.
They still stand out for whatever reason. We still stand out. I mean, we know that, right? Oftentimes on college campuses, people are looking for Jewish husbands, right? They're still standing out. And Ein Esther Magillat Moladata ve'etama. It could also be you don't want to stand out in a bad economic time. I go back to Vanachala Mdinot Asav Vayiten Maset Ki Ad HaMelech. And you've got like a party before in the first parak, and now you've got another party for Esther, which is clearly much smaller. And I think, you know, she's chosen. By the way, her seat's not secure either, right? Because it continues. Like, if she's chosen, why are we having another selection process, another beauty pageant? So her seat is not secured in the king's palace.
I mean, I always assume that if Esther tells Achashverosh she's Jewish, he'll kill her. I'm not sure if that's what everyone was told, but the truth is that if you actually look at the Psukim, and when I was reading your book, I actually read through the Psukim again, there's no reason given.
No, there's no reason given.
I can throw in an extra.
No, it says that Mordechai told her not to.
Mordechai told her not to. So why did Mordechai tell her not to?
I think he was hiding it. Meaning, I think he was hiding her in many ways, right? She is adopted by Mordechai. That's Meforash in the Pasuk, right? And they have very assimilated names. And it could be that Mordechai is using Esther and he gets closer to power. It sounds like unpleasant. But when you marry kings, look at the story of Shlomo and Bat Paro, etc. This was not unusual then, right? That you had marriages to become closer to power and international powers. That was not unusual. You know, I once asked Rav Amital, going back to Rav Amital, how does he understand the story of Shlomo taking Bat Paro? He looked at me and said, very simply, it's how you made an international agreement, the Brit, Ben Amim, at that time, is you married someone. You know, I was a yeshiva kid at the time. It kind of bothered me. But I think he's right.
I think there's a positive alternative explanation, which I think actually might fit quite nicely with what you're saying. And that is that there is the psychodrama of the Jews throughout the generations. And that is that probably Mordechai told Esther not to tell anyone that she was Jewish, because he thought it would be a problem if it was known that she was Jewish. And the Megillah is kind of parodying that, because you have time and time again.
Oh, very good.
Time and time again, the Psukim come back that you have all these different nations, and everyone's written into in their own language, and there's lots of problems with the Persian culture. They're hedonistic, they're lewd, they're all these different things. The one thing they're not is racist, as in they don't seem to have problems with many, many different nationalities.
Yeah,
what happens is that the Jews are afraid to be Jews. So Mordechai tells Esther, don't tell anyone you're Jewish. Ironically, what happens in the whole second half of the Megillah, once the story changes? As soon as the Jews, as it's found out that Mordechai and Esther are Jews,
it's fine.
They're pretty safe.
Yeah.
Right? That's the big drama. When the Jews are scared to be Jews, you have the whole story of Haman and stuff like that. And afterwards, they're pretty safe. Just because everyone's got
I'm going to borrow that from you, by the way, and use it.
With pleasure. I think there's a...
By the way, I have a story from like a few weeks ago that's like similar to that. A guy called me out of the blue. He had studied with my son in yeshiva, not in the Gush, in a different yeshiva. And anyway, he was on a trip to India. And he didn't know what to do, if he should wear his yarmulke and insist on getting his kosher food or whatever it is. I told him, go for it. The first thing is, as soon as you stop doing it, it never comes back. The second thing is, what I found for 30 years of my career, is the more you wear a yarmulke and demand your kosher food, the more people respect you, not the less people respect you. And he was like a little nervous. It was his first overseas trip. He reported back afterwards that, in fact, that was just fine in India. And I think it's fine everywhere, by the way.
There's a great Rabbi Sachs line, which the truth is, the idea starts in the Netziv, but it's a great Rabbi Sachs line that non-Jews are embarrassed of Jews who are embarrassed of Jews. And non-Jews find pride in Jews who are proud of Jews, which is a very striking point. I think there's an amazing pasuk, if I can just actually make everyone look in for one moment. If you look in Perek Bet, just before the bit which Michael was describing, Perek Bet, pasuk Chaf. The pasuk we were just talking about. Ein Esther magedet molata vet ama kasher tziva alea Mordechai. Esther doesn't say where she's born, where she's from, like Mordechai told her. The pasuk should end at that point in time.
Right, except it continues.
It continues. What's the next bit? It says, so she listened to what Mordechai said, just like it was when he was bringing her up. What on earth does that pasuk add? What does it mean? It just means she wouldn't say who she was, where she was born? No, that was already said in the first part of the pasuk. What's that pasuk really saying? Esther was brought up, not telling people who she was. And therefore, this is just a continuation of that same attitude, and then we get back into the Haman story.
Who wants to ask a question?
I just want to make a comment about
Just speak louder.
I want to make a comment about hatred to Jews when financial downturns happen.
Yeah.
You were talking about how capital must be raised for wars. In the Christian world, at least, because that it was forbidden to take interest on loans, court Jews usually were the instrument that the courts used to raise money for the king's coffers, and it had the added benefit of having the people's anger directed toward the Jews and not the king. In the Muslim world, also, they've had the same forbidden. I don't know if they use that to raise money for the king's coffers, but also you have the same in Islam, the Jews, the Arabs of Hebron murdered their Jewish neighbors because they owed them money and they couldn't make the payments.
Thank you.
I want to move quickly on because I've just noticed the time. There's a dramatic dialogue which happens maybe at one of the turning points of the Megillah.
Mm-hmm.
After Haman's decree, Mordechai puts on sackcloth, he goes out to the streets, he cries out, Saka, Sara, Mara, I think the expression is. That's the one. And
which is, by the way, a phrase borrowed from Esav.
Phrase borrowed from Esav, fascinatingly enough. Not the character you'd associate with Mordechai.
No.
And he goes to Esther and he says, time to do something. And Esther hesitates. And I want you to take us through how you read that dialogue.
Okay. Boy, that's a deep textual one. So Mordechai goes out and he's, in the book I describe it as almost protesting. He feels like like Avilut, like mourning, but through textual innuendo I think he's actually protesting. And he comes, and Esther becomes upset when they tell her all about this. And what does she try to do? She sends Mordechai clothing. She doesn't want to deal. She really doesn't want to deal with it. And then she calls Hatach. Hatach is one of the Sarisei HaMelech. And she tells him, what is this? What are you doing? Almost, you're like embarrassing me. Why are you calling on me? Ladat mazeh ve'al mazeh. And she also tells him, take off your sackcloth. What are you doing? And Hatach comes out to Mordechai, and Mordechai tells him very clearly, here's what happened. Ed kol asher karahu, to him, right? To him personally. Veit parashat hakesef asher amar Haman lishkol al ginzei hamelech bayudim la'abdam. Hey, look, Haman is trying to bribe the king or pay the king to get rid of us. And sends the decree, the royal decree, and tells her, go to the king and ask for your Am. Then Hatach comes to tell Esther. Esther sends him back to Mordechai. This is quite a ping pong for a national emergency. And she tells him, you can't go in, right? כל עבדי המלך ועם מדינות המלך יודעים אשר כל איש ואישה שיבוא למלך החצר הפנימית אשר לא יקרא אחד דתו להמית, except for who the king invites. And by the way, I'm on the outs. I haven't been called for 30 days. And then we have a very, very strange pasuk. Is this what you're after?
Yep.
Vayagidu leMordechai et divrei Esther. Wait a minute. We have Hatach, he's one person, and all of a sudden it says Vayagidu in plural. And you say, what happens here? And my assumption here is that Hatach is somewhat of a compromised double agent here. And he's going back and forth, but the messages, and we can spend a lot of time on this, are not getting back and forth clearly enough. And so, Vayagidu leMordechai et divrei Esther, Esther figures out that there's something up here, and she sends other people to Mordechai to tell him, and then Mordechai, only then, can tell her, Al tidami b'nafshech limalet beit hamelech mikol haYehudim. Right? You can't stand aside here. You've kind of got to go take care of this. Is that what you were after?
Keep going.
Okay. כי מחר יש תחרישי בעת הזאת, רווח והצלה יעמוד ליהודים במקום אחר, ואת ובית אביך תאבדו, ומי יודע אם לעת כזאת הגעת למלכות. First of all, I should say in the name of my Rabbi of Lichtenstein, he has this great thing, you can read about it, and he says, אכפת לך או לא אכפת לך? Do you care or do you not care, Esther? Are you just going to be the queen of this Persian king, or do you really care? I think my own interpretation is a little bit more complicated, which is that you'll disappear, right? Because you'll become assimilated into the house. But eventually the Jews will figure this out. Maybe Makom Acher in this case is also an allusion to back in Israel. Is that what you're after? Am I still going? Where do you want me to get to?
I want you to talk about what's going on in their heads.
You're going to have to reprompt my memory then on that.
Why is she hesitant?
She's not sure who she is, I think, really.
Okay.
She's not sure who she is. Is she the king's Persian wife, or is she proudly Jewish? And that's a big kind of element that is ever present here in this story. She's not really sure who she is at the end of the day.
Does she decide who she is or not?
Rav Lichtenstein would say yes.
I said yes until I read your book.
Yeah, I'm not certain she decides
so expand
who she
on
is.
that.
Boy, you're really getting me into the details here that I have to go back and reread, in all honesty. But Mordechai ends up going and doing her bidding. She hasn't fully bought into this. And in the beginning of the next parak, she gets dressed up in Persian clothing, right? V'tebash Esther malchut, right? So sure, Chazal described it as Ruach HaKodesh, but she gets dressed up in Persian clothing. And she told him, Lech kinos et kol yidin הנמצאים בשם ותשומו אליי ואל תאכלו ואל תשתו 3 ימים לילה ויום גם אני ונערותי עצום כן ובכן אבוא למלך שלא חדלת וכאשר עבדתי. She's trying, she's joining, but she's not all in. She doesn't go and say, hey, I got this. She's trying to figure it out still. You're drilling me, and I'm feeling like I'm not answering your question.
What I want to move to, which I think kind of gets half answered or not half answered as the story continues, is then we get to where the narrative really changes.
Yeah.
Right? Even literally the theme tune changes, and Perek Vav starts off.
In a parak later, the theme tune changes.
Perek later, the theme tune changes.
Yeah, in Vav, not in Hey. Hey
Not in
is
Hey.
when she goes to invite Achashverosh.
Which is interesting because Vav is normally seen as the turning point. But
right.
in some ways, the end of Perek Dalet is the turning point.
Correct.
Because fascinatingly enough, the main character of Megillas Esther, has not spoken a word in the entire story
until Perek Hey.
Until the very, very end of Perek Dalet
Yeah.
and then the beginning of Perek Hey.
Yeah.
That's almost 40%. In terms of Psukim, at least 50% of the story has gone past, without her uttering a word.
She at the end of Perek Daled talks to shlichim, right? Not to any of the main characters. It's like still past, but yes.
Which is very interesting. And then we have Haman is invited to the first feast with Achashverosh, and then we have what seems like the big twist. The king can't sleep. Beginning of Perek Vav, Achashverosh can't sleep. Or if I'm going to be more precise, Narada Shnat HaMelech. The king's sleep drifted off. You take that economically. What's going on there?
He's concerned about the financial stability of the kingdom. Think about, he has had a downturn based on a war, and there's a shortage of capital. And all of a sudden, Esther invites him to a big party, right? And he's worried, like, what's going on here? Haman's the guy with the money, too. He's invited to the party, right? He offered the 10,000 silver talents, and he's worried, where am I going to get this from? And by the way, that's what prompts him to remember Bigtan Teresh, the Shnei Shomrei Asaf. That ties the story. Why all of a sudden he remembered this? Just because he woke up in the middle of the night and they brought him to Sefer HaZichronot? No, because the whole story ties together through this notion of an up and down economy, right? You have a down economy. Bigtan and Teresh try to kill him. Haman tries to bring money back into the equation. Now Esther comes and says, I'll throw a party, remembering that the previous party for when she was selected queen is smaller. And he's saying, why are you spending my money? And Nadash Nata Melech, Vayomer Lavir Sefer HaZichronot Divrei HaYamim, Vayuni Koreim Lifnei HaMelech, Vayimatzei Chatuv, Asher Yigid Mordechai, Bigtana Vateresh, Shnei Sarisei HaMelech Mishomrei Asaf, Asher Bikshu L'Shloachel B'Melech Achashverosh. Right? It all ties it together through that entire period, beginning at the end of Perek Bet, really starts in Perek Aleph, but the end of Perek Bet and the first part of Bigtan Vateresh to this point as well.
Interesting. Would you connect this to other points where we have kings in Tanakh who can't sleep?
Well, you have Paro. Paro who wakes up in the middle of the night because he's worried about a dream about 7 fat and skinny cows and 7 fat shibolim. Thank you for reminding me. And you see, this is like a theme, right? And you have Yaakov, by the way, who dreams. He's not a king, but Yaakov dreams also. This is a theme. And it's present here as well.
So I think what's interesting to point out here.
You've read the book, by the way, more recently than I have. I'll point out.
if you've read it after 5 p.m. today, then you've read it more recently than me. But interestingly enough, there's one of the Tanakh characters. You refer to this in a number of places, and this is picked up on a lot when it comes to Megillat Esther.
Is Yosef.
Is Yosef.
Yeah.
Right, Yosef, by the way, when I said there's one other person in Jewish history who's had to make it alone and been exiled from Eretz Yisrael having lived there, it's Yosef, by the way. He's the Galut man. He's the person who's able to hold on to his religion, despite the fact that the culture around him is almost overwhelming.
But Yaakov too.
And Yaakov too.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about the Megillah is what should really happen in Perek Vav. I think if we're going with the Yosef comparison, the king should go to sleep, and he should have a dream, right? This is what we're waiting for. We've seen it with Paro before. We've seen it with Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, who, by the way, is the other person whose attitude you can strongly contrast with the various characters in the Megillah. And the one interesting thing which you have...
He's referring to, by the way, Daniel doesn't eat the pata melech. He doesn't eat the bread of the king. The Chor Nehemiah too, by the way. The
Chor Nehemiah. Also, you have, in the beginning of Sefer Daniel, you have the opposite of the beginning of Megillat Esther. You have the Jews in Bavel, and Daniel is very proud to say he's not eating with them. And he's actually accepted, and he's a loved member of the king's court. What should really happen in the beginning of Perek Vav, it happens in Nebuchadnezzar, happens with Paro, is the king should fall asleep. He should have a dream about, I don't know, Haman trying to kill him, Haman trying to kill the Jews, something about the Jews being saved. He should wake up. And that should be the turning of the story. And kind of like you get across when you have a lot of similar themes lining up and then one difference, that difference is there to teach you something. And I think that gets to the core of the Megillah, is we're waiting for this supernatural help to come, we're waiting for the magic dream, and then you have a spoiler at the end. He just doesn't get to sleep.
I'm glad you said, I think it's important to point out that one of my departure points from, I think, the normal thinking of the Megillah The one thing in the Megillah is really derived from a drasha in Chazal about Haster Haster Panai Bayom Ahu, because the name of God is not mentioned in the Megillah. We all know this. And there's a basic assumption that God is operating in the background, which I'm sure is true, but the author of the Megillah chooses to leave God's name out. And I think that's also a hint here. He's making a point about the people in Shushan, that maybe God has returned to Yerushalayim and to the Beit HaMikdash and to the Mizbeach and to Eretz Yisrael, and they've kind of missed the message that came from God, right? When Zerubbabel and Ben Shaltiel and Yehoshua Kohen HaGadol and then Ezra come back to Eretz Yisrael and they don't, the author's kind of saying to them, do you not hear the word of God? But there's an interesting contrast, which I actually only thought of after I wrote the book, which is that Yechezkel is really the first Navi to prophesy in the Golah. And what he said, what does he see in the Maaser Merkavah? He sees the Shekhinah leaving Yerushalayim and going down with them to Bavel. And kind of the point of the author of Megillat Esther is, hey, it's come back. The Shekhinah is not present in Shushan HaBirah, and that's why you don't have God's name in the Megillah, and you need to come back with the Shekhinah.
Just realized we've gone over time. In 1 minute, can you sum up what the takeaway message of the end of the Megillah would be for you?
Okay, I'll make a comparison that I don't make in the book, which again I only thought of afterwards. The beginning of the book I said, Vayhi B'mei is similar to Ruth and Esther and 3 other places in Tanakh. Turns out that the end of the Megillah struck me only afterwards, which is, and it might be in the English version, but I don't remember. And that is, if you look at the end of Megillat Ruth, twice the Megillah tells of the lineage of David HaMelech, how you get from Ruth and Boaz to David HaMelech. And it ends with national kingship, national sovereignty, national independence. And the end of Megillat Esther ends with business as usual. Which, by the way, parallel to what it says in Perek Gimel, Asher Gidlo by Haman, Sheilo Amech, Haloim Ketuvim b'Sefer Divrei Hayamim, Lemachem Adayu Faras. It's in the Persian annals. And there's almost a stark contrast there between the end of Megillat Esther, which is, you're part of the Persian story, versus the end of Megillat Ruth, which is the founding of the national kingdom of our people. And I think the answer is, even though they were saved from the anti-Semitism, unfortunately, a large percentage of our people faded away into the background of Persian society over time. And I think that's unfortunately been our story throughout many, many years of Galut. And I think the big takeaway from the story comes back to what you started with Rav Amital, is that the book of Esther is a call. It's a call that you've all answered, but we need to help other people answer, which is come back and build a country. That's the call of the Megillah. This was a poor country, but people came back and built it. It took a bunch of very brave pioneers to come do this. And it's a hard road, it's not an easy road, and politics is messy, and the military is messy, and sending your kids to the army. I just came from my son's Tekes, that's where I just came from. He just finished Maslul, and it's scary, and he's going to go to Kav, but it matters. And ultimately, it doesn't just matter in kind of a personal spiritual level, it matters on a Jewish peoplehood level. It's how we find our own Jewish identity, which in itself, or Israeli identity, which in itself is messy and takes time to work out, and we're only 75 years into it. And trust me, at the time of 75 years into this, in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, which is exactly the time this was going on, it was also tense with the diaspora Jews. It was also tense politically. You can read about it in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. It was tense militarily, and it ended up making it 500 or so years. So we got a lot of work to do, but we need as many people on the boat as possible to come help us.